that these reports about Griffin's role have not been picked up in the U.S. media, in the U.S. national media. And they're kind of right. I mean, this material has not come through the U.S. media. They don't want Griffin roles opened up, because once they have the role of Griffin in the firings opened up, they'll ask why that happened. They will find and discover these emails, and in fact, now that they're public, we'll turn them over to the Conyers Committee, and then they'll find out that Griffin was deeply involved in the removal of legal voters. And now you're getting into potential felony area. That's a very serious business. So they want to stop the slippery slope of bringing in Griffin and revealing the entire chain of emails, not just his involvement in the firings, but what led up to it. And that brings us to the emails that you just saw on our report.
In this whole scandal, we keep hearing about voter fraud, but can you explain what is being talked about here with this aggressive effort to restrict particularly people of color voting in battleground states? What
happened is that the Republican Party was running a massive campaign directed by Karl Rove, and we know Tim Griffin from the written emails, to block voters' votes or to challenge their votes. One way to challenge voters was to say that they were stealing someone else's identity. Someone is voting for Amy Goodman. Well, they say the solution is to create ID cards. The problem is we can't find anyone anywhere who's committed this crime of stealing Amy Goodman's name to vote. People are not willing to go to jail to vote in some school board election or even for the presidency. What Griffin, Rove's assistant, wanted Iglesias to do, they gave them 110 names. They wanted them, for example, to arrest some guy named, say, roughly, if I remember, like Juan Gonzalez, and say he voted twice, stealing someone's ID. Well, in New Mexico, there may be two guys named Juan Gonzalez. So Iglesias just thought this was absolute junk stuff, and he wouldn't do it. So it's all about trying to create a hysteria about fraudulent voting. There are 120 million people that voted, and I can't find an actual case out of 120 of a prosecution a real prosecution of any single voter for voter identity theft. There's like 5 cases in the country involving some minor offices. That's it. So it's a complete false prosecution setup, kind of like the Soviet Union. Just grab people, put them on show trials, maybe you let them go later, maybe they languish in jail. On the other side, they're covering up their own programmatic challenge of voters, which was not covered in the U.S. press. 3 million people were challenged. By the way, this isn't, from the Democracy Now! Black helicopter. This is from the raw data of the United States Election Assistance Commission. 3 million challenges. These votes were basically lost. Over 1 million votes were lost. 500,000 absentee ballots were thrown out, and many, many of those were votes of African American and Hispanic soldiers that went to Iraq, got their ballots challenged under this Karl Rove, Tim Griffin scheme, and they lost their vote. And they didn't even know that they lost their vote. So all this is being covered up, and so they cannot now, they don't want to open up the whole story of Tim Griffin and how he became U.S. Attorney, what his role was, because it goes all the way back. And what David Iglesias was saying, U.S. Attorney, now Captain, by the way, he's back in the military. Captain Iglesias was saying, if you can show this chain of intent, that it's all about the voting, and he's being punished for not bringing these false prosecutions, says that's an obstruction of justice charge that can be brought against Karl Rove. And by the way, one little sidelight on that is that Captain Iglesias, one of the excuses that they try to give for firing him, Amy, was that he was absent for too many days from office. They didn't mention that he was absent because he was on active duty in the U.S. Naval Reserve. He is now, by the way, bringing the very first claim ever. You cannot fire someone for doing their duty in the U.S. Naval Reserve. He's now filing a charge against the Commander-in-Chief, George Bush, for attempting to fire him for simply showing up for active duty.
The Arkansas Leader reported, enterprising reporters examining Griffin's fanciful resume discovered his blistering record as a prosecutor was nothing more than paper shuffling. In short stints in the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps and federal prosecutor offices, he'd never taken a single case to trial. His career had consisted almost altogether of political hatchet work.
Well, you have to look at what's going on here. You've replaced Iglesias, who is, the Tom Cruise lawyer, who has real experience as a prosecutor, as a trial lawyer from the military. They remove him and they put in a paper shuffler. Worse, someone who's actually shuffling voters' papers that he shouldn't be shuffling. You saw the kind of emotional reaction of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., voting rights attorney. He was the most emotional because you have to remember that his father, his late father, was the predecessor to Alberto Gonzalez. Imagine, we've gone from Robert F. Kennedy Sr. to Roberto Gonzalez.
Alberto, right.
Yeah. And you can, from Kennedy's view, this was an emotional issue. To see the office that his father used to protect civil rights being used deliberately to attack civil rights is a very serious business. But again, here, he's saying, and Iglesias is suggesting now with this evidence, that it rises now to obstruction of justice.
And interestingly, McClatchy newspaper is reporting as part of the strategy, the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division has sought to roll back policies to protect minority voting rights on virtually every significant decision affecting election balloting since 2001. The division's voting rights section has come down on the side of Republicans.
Well, even worse, what's not covered there is that they covered up the active attack on legal voters. I mean, you're talking, this caging list that we have in the 500 sheets, the 500 emails, we have 70,000 names. That's one state. This was a multi-million-dollar gold-plated attack operation on the right of minority voters to vote. And obviously, Griffin knew it because he was in charge of it. So you actually have the guys who are supposed to be protecting the voters are either actively covering up or even actively participating in knocking out legal voters. I mean, you have it's like the mob has grabbed the police department. That's the problem, by the way, with voter fraud, with real voter fraud, not the phony stuff of grabbing the Juan Gonzalez's of New Mexico. If you win, you've now grabbed the apparatus of protection and enforcement. It's the perfect crime.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you very much, Greg Palast, for joining us. Greg, investigative journalist, latest book just out in paperback called Armed Madhouse, From Baghdad to New Orleans, Sordid Secrets and Strange Tales of a White House Gone Wild. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting in over 500 stations around the country, on Pacifica and NPR stations, low-power FM, college and community radio stations, on public access TV and PBS TV stations, and both TV satellite networks, on Dish Network Channel 9415 Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and also on DirecTV Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at our website, and our headlines are in Spanish and transcript in audio form for any radio station to take around the world. As we turn now to look at the dire situation